Okay, I've had several folks tell me it's 8 o'clock, and so we'll get moving. This now is a time certain, 8 p.m. Public hearing, and I will turn that public hearing as dealing with redistricting. That happens every 10 years, so I will turn to our city manager, or turn to Lori, our deputy city manager, Lori Sassoon.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council members, for this opportunity to be here again. It is public hearing number 2 concerning our redistricting for city council boundaries. And tonight we have Todd Tatum here once again from National Demographics Corporation to review where we are on the draft maps and some of the public input tools that we have available. Before I turn over to Todd, I just want to make one comment for the benefit of the public. We did get a piece of public input that I thought might be interesting to speak to. We had a resident ask about the reasons why we're redistricting, since redistricting is required every 10 years, but we just redistricted in 2016 when we created districts. So great question. The answer to that is that we are required to redistrict every time there is a census, which is every 10 years. So in 2016, we districted using the 2010 census data. Even though it's only been 4 years since those boundaries were created, we are indeed required to revisit the matter since there has been a census. So that is the reason. Going forward, then it will be every 10 years. So want to provide that clarification, and I'll hand it off to Todd to walk you through tonight's presentation.
Great. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. Great to be back here in Rancho. I'll briefly go through the redistricting process. Again, the state requires a minimum of 4 public hearings. The city of Rancho Cucamonga will have 5 based on your settlement agreement. This is the second of the 5th, as Lori pointed out. The third will be on January 19th, followed by February 2nd and February 16th. The deadline for adoption for your new maps is April 17th, 2022. Again, the major challenge we had this year was the delay in the census data being released. The U.S. Census data came out in August. We got the state prisoner adjusted numbers September 20th. There was a flaw in those, and we didn't get the redone numbers from the state back until September 27th. Now we have all the numbers in, and as you'll see in a few minutes, some of the draft maps have been drawn and ready for review. Just a quick brief update. We went over this last time, but for those of you that are new to the process, we'll review why we do this and how the categories that we follow and the rules and the goals. First of all, we follow the federal laws, which are equal population. We follow the Federal Voting Rights Act, and there can be absolutely no racial gerrymandering. Second, the California criteria for the cities. This is the new California Voting Rights Act laws, and these are now ranked in order that we have to follow. Number 1 being the districts need to be geographically contiguous, where to the extent practicable. We want to do our best to have undivided neighborhoods and communities of interest. We want easily identifiable boundaries for your districts. We want to achieve compactness, meaning we don't want to bypass one group of citizens to put together with another more distant group. And as always, we are prohibited to discriminate against any political party. And again, you'll see any NDC produced data will not show any party affiliation. The third and more traditional redistricting principles are we want to minimize voters shifted into different districts. We do our best to make sure that you can stay in your current district if at all possible. Keeping in mind we want to respect the voters' choices and continuity in office. We want to identify any future population growth, and that's really just for the, I guess, staff and council that comes after you 10 years from now. They'll kind of know what's coming. And we want to do our best to preserve the core of your existing districts. NDC developed 3 draft maps for the city council. I'm going to show you all 3 of those next. Map 103 was presented to the plaintiffs per the city's settlement, and the discussion on that is ongoing. The first map we've labeled map 101. This map, as you can see, the red dotted lines show your existing districts. The colors are obviously, or am I backwards?
No, you're right.
Okay, yeah. The colors would be the new districts. This map has a deviation of 7.77%. We need the deviation to be 10% or lower, so this map is pretty close to being population balanced. Map 102 has a deviation of 4.69%, so it's basically population balanced at that percentage. And you can see there is a little difference between 101 and 102. Map 103, here are the stats for map 102, as you can see in your presentation. Map 103, again, is the map that was presented to the plaintiffs, and it has a deviation of 7.77%, which is basically the same as the first map that I showed you. And there are your numbers there for that map.
So before we go on, this might be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about where we are with regard to the settlement agreement with the lawsuit we had in 2015, 2016. And I wanted to ask our city attorney, Jim, and I talked about this in advance, kind of give the public kind of a very concise overview of where we are so we can understand that we're really working on two parallel tracks. We have a public input process that we're making our way through, inviting the public to comment and to provide us input, but we're also bound by the terms of that settlement agreement. So city attorney will give you a little more information for the public's benefit.
Yes, so to discuss this, this particular process, we have to look back 2 years, more than 2 years, to the fact that when the council was first considering redistricting, you couldn't do it by yourself, by ordinance, you had to do an election. We got one of these famous letters from a firm that challenges at-large cities and other entities that have voting at large on the theory of that there's racial discrimination in the voting because the minority vote, the class of people or the protected class that you can identify are not having their wishes met in the electoral process because they're essentially swamped out by an Anglo vote. And the CVRA provides a remedy to go by districts to cure that problem. It's not racial gerrymandering, because you have other criteria you have to follow when you do that, but in my view, part of what happens is aimed at racial gerrymandering. So a minority group has more to say about who's elected. It's as simple as that, so you can't ignore the obvious. But in any event, we went through a lawsuit the last, 4 years ago, I think it really was, and we had a lawsuit which the settlement essentially said, we have established the districts, we're going to go on with the districts, leave it alone because there's going to be a census and before 2 more council elections go down, at which time we'll be looking at different data. So what happened was the petitioners in that case, in a settlement after a mediation, were given an opportunity to participate in this process by dealing with the city and the city staff. So while we're going through these maps and taking in the public input, we're also negotiating with that group of people who filed that suit. They are supposed to produce 1 or 2 maps. The staff is supposed to produce 1 or 2 maps that would recommend to the council, and then we see if we can agree on one. If we can't agree on one, then we would go into a mediation with them to see if we could agree on it. So we're trying to get 2 processes to interface, which is not necessarily easy or going to happen. And if we can't agree through mediation, we'll have a binding arbitration where a map that the staff wants to present to the council for approval, they'll have a map that they want this, and there'll be an arbitrator who theoretically picks one of those maps if we can't get this resolved with them. So that's what's going along as a parallel process. We have swapped 1 map with them. We sent them one. They sent something like a map back. I'm not going to characterize it as a map because I don't think it quite meets the criteria. But so we're in that process, if anybody wonders.
Thank you, Mr. Markman. So we just wanted to be sure we're being transparent with the community, that they've got some information about where we are in that settlement. So with that, we'll go on, Todd, to talk about defining neighborhoods and some of the mapping tools that we do have available to the community.
Great, yes. So again, for the public, and we encourage all of those citizens of Rancho Cucamonga that would like to get involved to please get involved, and you'll see in a few slides how you can specifically provide the city draft maps. But what we want to know is what are your neighborhoods and what are your geographic boundaries? So when you think about your neighborhoods and communities of interest, look at natural neighborhood dividing lines such as highways, major roads, rivers, canals, hills, areas around parks or schools, and any other neighborhood landmarks that we might not know about as demographers and map drawers. And in the absence of any public testimony, we end up having to rely on planning records and other documents to help us define what your neighborhoods are. We want you to take one step further from defining your neighborhood and define your communities of interest. We ask you to define your neighborhoods and communities of interest for two reasons. First of all, the law requires us to ask that. And second, we also want to emphasize that if we do have to make changes in the current districts, that we do our best to make the adjustments where we don't disrupt those communities of interest and neighborhoods that you have identified. So we want to make sure that communities of interest benefit from being included in either a single district that has effective and fair representation, or your community of interest might benefit more having multiple representatives. Next up, we have our public mapping and mapping review tools. You all have actually three different tools at your disposal. You have access to the simple map drawing tool that we call the Paper Map Kit that allows anybody who wants to use paper versus a computer the opportunity to draw a map. But there's also an add-on Excel-based tool that goes with those maps that will allow you to insert a lot of demographic data that otherwise you wouldn't be able to do with the map, the paper map. Then you also will have access to an interactive review map, and you'll see in our examples. This is an example of the simple map drawing tool. And again, you can go to the website, download it, get out your colored markers, colored pens, draw the maps the way you would like. The population numbers are within each census block, so you can add those up to make sure you get as close to equal population as you can. Again, unfortunately, with just the paper maps, you don't get the demographic numbers. But with the Excel add-on, you do get the demographic numbers, and the maps are drawn then by population unit ID numbers, which you can enter in. And it's a very easy process, and it's all explained with instructions on the website, the drawrc.org website. And also, after your maps are done and the other maps are in, you'll have access to the ESR Online ArcGIS tool that allows you to compare your map with other maps. If you want to draw multiple maps, this will allow you to see the differences in each map, and it's a great way to see how yours compares to maps that, say, NDC has drawn, maps that your neighbors have drawn, or again, if you draw multiple maps. This is a quick process timeline for you all. Again, your deadline is April 17th, 2022. You have 5 public hearings. They're listed out there. And I am confident that you all will be completed well before your April deadline. With that, we just ask the questions again of the public. What's your neighborhood? What are its boundaries? What other notable areas are in the city, and what are their boundaries? Do you all have any questions about the mapping tools? Any questions about the draft maps presented? And I'm sure Mr. Markman has answered any questions on the process as it relates to the settlement agreement.
Great, thank you, Todd. And if we'll just go to that last slide, make sure the community has that. Can you advance this one more? That's our website where all the information is. You'll see these maps that were shared tonight are on that website for you to review. We have the mapping tools, we have demographic data, we have recordings of these meetings. It's really a kind of a repository of various resources for the community to learn about this process. And then importantly, there is that email address, city.clerk@cityofrc.us. If people have questions or comments, please do submit those to that address, and we'll respond and forward those comments onto the council and respond to their questions. And with that, that concludes our presentation, Mayor. We'd recommend you open the public hearing and see if there's anyone here who has some comments or insights to share with us tonight.
Any questions of staff or the consultant before we open the public hearing at this time? Seeing none, then we will go ahead and open the public hearing. Public hearing is now open on this matter. Is there anyone here in the audience that desires to address the city council regarding this item? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing. And further comment, any other questions or comments from city council members? Then I would propose to, is there a motion for item G1, public hearing number 3 will take place on January 19th at 8 p.m., time certain in the council chambers. We invite the community to submit comments and review documents at www.drawrc.org. So there is no action we need. This is just this second of 5 public hearings. And I guess the 5th public hearing thereafter, then we take some action at some point, okay? Very good. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Appreciate your comments. And thank you, Mr. Attorney, for clarifying the history of where we're at today. So, all right. Since we concluded the rest of our meeting, we now will adjourn our meeting. And